All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mark Baldo. I'm the Director of the Research Lab of Electronics, long-time home and supporter of quantum at MIT. And I'm very happy to be here to present the industry panel. So I thought that we'll start with just introductions quickly. I'll give brief introductions, and then perhaps you guys could kind of introduce yourself a little bit with your vision for, this is the industry panel, so let's talk about the vision for the technology and where we might be in a few years. So first on my left is my colleague, Professor Dirk England. Dirk, part of the Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. He got his PhD from the Jelena Vukovic group, I think, at Stanford, and was a postdoc with Misha Lukin down the road in Harvard, one of many products of the Lukin group here.
And Hong Kong Park.
And Hong Kong Park, okay, true. Dirk has been outside the lab, prolific with commercialization. And so some examples, Light Matter, Axiomatic, a current co-founder of Axiomatic, an AI company, and particularly relevant to us today is co-founder of Coera. So welcome, Dirk.
Thank you, Mark.
Then next on to Dirk's left is Professor Will Oliver. Will's already been introduced today. All I noticed is they left out the time you were in the band, I think.
Oh boy.
Maybe that's a story for another time. So Will, of course, is you've been a co-founder of Atlantic Quantum, and along with your many other roles. Then on Will's left is Sergio Cantu. Sergio was a grad student at MIT in Vladimir Voletic's group. He told me at lunch that he used to work on one atom, lots of photons, and is now working on lots of photons, lots of atoms, I think.
Yeah, well, my PhD was Ribber polaritons, so a lot of atoms to control individual photons.
Yeah.
And now I flipped it, so it's a lot of photons to manipulate individual atoms. So.
Yeah, that scale up is going to be a theme, I think, of the afternoon. And so you were one of the five founders, or five initial employees, I guess, of Coera in 2021, and you're now the Vice President of Quantum Systems at Coera.
That's right. I joined the first technical team that we built the first machine at Coera. That machine, now named Aquila, has been connected to the cloud for the last couple of years, where people now can, from all over the world, submit tasks to it.
Okay, excellent. And finally, we're privileged to welcome Professor Chris Munro, one of the sort of pioneers of quantum in the United States in general. So Chris is currently at Duke, where he was hired by our president, I understand. Before that, he was at Maryland and the Joint Quantum Institute and Joint Institute for Quantum and Computer Science, or Computer Science and Quantum, and before that at Michigan, I understand. And you were founder of IonQ, the famous trapped ion company. So we've got representatives, I think, from neutral atoms, superconducting computing, and trapped ions. Not that we want to pit you guys against each other, but still, we've got some representation here from some of the main themes. All right, so to begin, Dirk, maybe you could just tell us, where you think, what's your sort of vision in 5 years for, the technology? It's not too much.
Oh, that's tough. Things are moving so quickly. I think I'll give you sort of quickly my take on it, my motivation. You all know about the Carnot heat engine. So the people were making all kinds of different contraptions for pulling locomotives, and then eventually people said, well, like how well can I make this steam engine work? Is it good enough, or could it be 2 times better than where I am today? And the thermodynamics tells you what the bounds are. And it's very nice to know whether you're within 10% of what's possible. That's probably good enough. Or maybe you're 10 times away from what's possible. And when it comes to computing, we may be many orders of magnitude away from what's possible. With sensing, you might be maybe you're 3 orders, maybe 6 orders. You don't know. It's hard to tell. And one way to go about it is to use physics, because physics is the law of the land, and you can use it to try to give you bounds on how well different technologies could do certain things. And this has been, I think, sort of for me, like trained in physics chiefly, and then learning more and more about all the fascinating things in electrical engineering and computer science and so on. It's been about like, let's see, we can use physics to estimate how well something can work, and then we look at what is done today. And if you see a big gap, then it's either like you don't understand something, and the gap is not that big. It is nice, so I learn it better, or the gap is in fact that big, and meaning that you can do much better than today. And I would say that that's quantum sensing, computing, and so on fall into that pattern.
There's a big gap.
From what? Yeah, there's a huge gap. I mean, sensing is the same thing. Can you detect brain activity? Can you detect signals from the brain just magnetically, right? Magnetoencephalography. Not today, but the physics says you can do it, and perhaps with machine learning you can find the right signals, etc. And so there's a huge amount of unknown and unexplored space.
Okay, thanks. Well,
5 years.
yeah.
5 years. Okay. Well, I think we tend to overestimate what we're going to do in the next year or two. In fact, the Q2B is tomorrow, I think. And if you go out there to Silicon Valley to the Q2B, they're going to talk about how it's already here. At the same time, I think we underestimate what's going to happen in the 10-year time frame because we just can't, as human beings, predict that so well. I'm reminded earlier this year, Jensen Huang was asked, when are we going to have a useful quantum computer? And,
I was going to bring that up, but
well,
yeah.
he's a fantastic engineer, and he said it's going to be about 20 years. I think what he said is 30 years probably on the long side, 15 on the short side, about 20 years. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of the way I feel as well. Of course, after that, all quantum stocks tanked, but they recovered since then because 6 months later he came back and he said, well, but that was a fully functional quantum computer that's going to invent new pharmaceutical drugs. And I think he's right again, that this technology is going to evolve not as a step function. We're not going to wait 20 years and then suddenly everything's working. It's going to gradually evolve over time, maybe not linearly, kind of ups and downs. And at any given time, we'll start using them, quantum computers, and say, yeah, okay, that's great. It does this one thing, but I really wish it could do something more. Right? And that is the story of classical computing. I think it's going to be the story of quantum computing as well.
Okay. Yes.
5 years, I think what I see in the next 5 years in the context of neutral atoms is that if I look back 5 years, I see that the experiments were relatively simple in that, you had an objective design, at least for neutral atom arrays. You had some laser power to trap atoms, and you had relatively simple Rydberg lasers to kind of, do the entanglement. And what we've seen is that as we push the level of control that these atoms require to start now having ever more complex algorithms executed, we added a lot more capabilities to the machine. A big theme that I see coming up is now one of control. Balancing and keeping track of all these capabilities that get added will have to be really emphasized because, like I said, we're still working with individual atoms, but in neutral atoms, as we start now moving from physical control, but now really start working with logical patches, which is something that is quite fun in this architecture. For us to go from physical qubit control to now logical qubits and logical patches, the emphasis of control is quite important. And I think that what I see in the next 5 years will be both in controls, how do you act on the atoms themselves? But what we're starting to see on the circuits is also what do you do with the information that you get in between, right? Like as you extract information from the QPU, can you both stabilize the hardware? Can you, infer the state of the machine or the qubits that you're reading to be able to keep that circuit alive? And I think that those two pieces of course, push the control for performance and scale, but at the same time, what do you do with that information that you extract? I think is going to be a very big emphasis. The machine, I feel, in the next 5 years is going to change it's going to look very different. It's going to feel from single shot experiments to now a continuous machine that is just producing data nonstop.
Okay, thanks. Chris.
So the question is, what's going to happen in 5 years?
Yeah. Give us a pitch.
I'm not going to answer it directly. I'm going to pivot a little bit. However, or I'll answer it with the qualification of what a probability might be in 5 years. I do think, something like there's a 10% chance that there will be some commercial value to some of our quantum systems. It'll probably be niche. It'll probably be some heuristic that you can't prove. And I bring that up because the broader topic I find interesting, and this is a industry panel, but this field is still very academic. Obviously, it's very researchy. Every university, there must be 60 quantum centers across the country. And it's not just because it's fashionable. That's part of it, but also there's real science behind it, and it's really broad. And I think MIT typifies that. The quantum people here, it's not just physics. In fact, it's 7 or 8 different departments and strengths there. But I think industry and private funding of this field outweighs government funding by 10 to 1 or something. It's very interesting. I don't know of another example of that where we don't yet even know the use case of this kind of technology. So industry is going big, and it's something that we academics really need to deal with. And this 10%, I mean, I like to make the comparison that an investor, a speculative investor, might be happy with a 10% pay. A 10% probability of success, of course, it better pay off better than 10 to 1 on average for that to make sense. But an academic would never even come close to publishing a paper that has a 10% chance of being correct. So this speaks to a little bit of communication between these two camps. They're both really important right now. And I think both communities should look at the other and recognize how important they are. And it goes both ways. I think I have ridden both sides walking that fine line. And there are folks in industry that look at us academics and think, yeah, they don't, ideas are cheap, it's execution. So many stupid business lines that are like that. Ideas are easy. Really good ideas are not easy, but they'll say ideas are easy, execution is the hard thing. Well, you have to do both. And I think industry needs to recognize that. Academics should stop rolling their eyes at industry and realize that, like in the classical computing era, we use those machines to form new research. And I think it was pointed out earlier, I point this out all the time, that if there is a valley of the hype cycle in quantum, it's using these machines for science that really has a hope of keeping the thought process in this field, and eventually recognizing the big slope in the future of commercial quantum computing. So.
Yeah, okay, good. Let's come back, because I think you hit on like a whole number of key discussion topics then. So I'd like to pick them up in turn. The first one is, I think I think what we're trying to do at MIT with this quantum center is the way we've tried to evolve our sort of view of quantum is that it's time for it now to spread, to expand out, to cross as much of campus as it can, to bring in to new parts of the sort of intellectual space that previously haven't really interacted much with quantum. So there's 2 parts to that. First is what, from the sort of industry point of view, one of the things that quantum's looking for is applications. So what are key applications that you think are important for industry to learn about? So, for example, if we set up interactions here, for example, with biologists and so on, what do you think are key sort of most interesting targets where we're not very effective right now? We're not really talking to each other. So let me just, I'll try to randomize this a little bit. Will, why don't you, if it's okay?
Yeah, well, as I look at it, that's probably one of the most important questions we have today is, what algorithms are we going to design that will bring not just quantum advantage, but commercial quantum advantage in the future? Because this is going to be, a long, hard slog to Morag. And if we don't have something in hand that's going to generate revenue to drive next year's development, it's going to take a long time. And so that's one of the reasons I'm really excited about QMIT. I do think that, we've heard about today, and I think it's true, that the use of quantum computers for physical simulations, that's a very important problem for quantum chemistry as well. What I'm interested in seeing, how broadly that can go. And of course, chemistry and biology can be closely related. And I would like to see connections to biology. And we even heard from Hartmut Nevin this morning talking about, the use of inert xenon gas and Drosophila flies. And I think that's a very interesting direction, something I don't know very much about. But we do need to broaden the scope, cast a wide net, because we do need to find commercial quantum advantage, not just quantum advantage.
Any other thoughts on the panel?
Yeah, in terms of applications, I think they, as I said earlier, I think they will be heuristic. They're going to be things that typical academics don't like because you can't prove these things. And there's a great example of this. We have, most of us in quantum know Eddie Farhi, of course, professor of physics here. He had this idea called the optimization algorithm, QAOA, quantum approximate optimization algorithm. There's no reason this should actually work. And they did show some speed up on some type of optimization problem, but then some smart classical non-quantum computer science group came up with an even better approach. So that's great. I think it's great for everybody. So it was a narrow observation that couldn't be really proved, and it turned out it wasn't any faster. These things are really important though, because we need to broaden the use case, the communities that start to think about storing and processing information in a really different way. And it's not going from vacuum tubes to silicon. These were still effectively Turing machines, classical information. This is really different. And I think for quantum computers to play a role in the long-term future, I think there has to be massive education that even high school kids, they can learn this stuff. They can learn the prescriptions of it. They're not really doing that yet. It's changing. But I pivoted, but
okay. The sense I'm getting is build it and they'll come, perhaps. Dirk?
I would, I'll venture a comment on this. So Sergio was mentioning that one of the big things in the next 5 years is control. And if you, you see these videos or I took my son a couple of weeks ago to the Museum of Science here up the street, and they have these robots that can do backflips. It's incredible. Robots that can do like 5 years ago, I would have never thought this could be done. These things are agile, and there are many companies developing these now. And what's underneath it is the pairing of a good physics model and the algorithms to compute it, right? So here, if in the case of a quantum computer, we can develop a reasonably good physics model that could run on a digital computer or perhaps another kind of quantum computer. You can then train on that, and learn how to control this machine better. So I think we'll learn a lot about the sort of equivalent backflips of quantum devices that seem possibly difficult to control by sort of our normal rule-based ways. But if I look, for example, at Ike Chuang here, he's telling us like what are the bounds of what's possible in terms of sensing, and that's a bound. But you don't tell us how to do it exactly. But by learning, you can learn how to get there or how to close the gap, and that is, like we said, it's a vast gap. And I think the confluence of machines like learning methods with good physics models will show amazing things, not just in controlling quantum computers, but then transferring that to other applications, like biology, perhaps. Like that I think will be an exciting, exciting next step there.
Something that I wanted to add is, just to echo your previous comment of build it and they will come. At Quera, the first machine that we built was a quantum simulation machine, right? So it was not strictly digital, strictly not gate-based. And at the time, people would ask us, why are you wasting your time on this? Where are the gates of this machine? But ever since, the machine has been out, cloud accessible, and we've seen it being used for, not just portfolio. People have been playing and start using it to start understanding what is this kind of machine that is available as a quantum simulation tool. There's very clear, physics mapping. We've seen people use it for high energy physics and start simulation there as well. But in general, just putting it out there into the world has also allowed us to start talking to people in biology, in chemistry, in pharma that at least are just curious, right? That reach out and they say, hey, this thing is there. Can you show us how to use it? What kind of problems can we start playing with it? And this is just because, we just put it out there. Right?
Okay, cool. So let's think more about scale up. So sort of each of you represent a sort of a technology that is presently trying to get to bigger and bigger scales, more and more logical qubits. If we look at that, and conscious here that the audience has many people from many different disciplines in it, what kind of problems do you think are being created right now? What kind of problems in materials? We've talked a lot, I think, about algorithms already. But basically, what can other people do to kind of get into this field and start helping? Anyone want to take a crack at that first? I realize this might be quite different for the different platforms.
I might start out at a very high level. I tend to, you have three platforms here, atoms, ions, and superconductors. I think these are really the only three systems that are currently being built into systems, meaning that it's possible now with this technology to not know the details of the transistor or the effective transistor. You can program these things. So we can think about a full stack approach with algorithms and compilers and so forth. So it's interesting that, it's well represented up here. But of the platforms out there, I tend to divide them into two types. The synthetic ones, which usually means solid state. So these are assembled. They're maybe emergent quantum degrees of freedom, where typically at very low temperatures you can freeze out all the bad stuff. And natural quantum systems that aren't fabricated at all, they already exist: atoms, ions, electrons, photons. And what's interesting about the field, you mentioned materials. I think there's a lot of material science that still needs to make these emergent quantum systems better. Think of single silicon spins or single dopants in intrinsic silicon. There's a lot of material science still to do because those systems are just not perfect. They have finite coherence times, even when they're cold. The natural quantum systems, by some measure, if you pick the right one, they're already good enough by themselves. They have no idle decoherence. But you're not out of the woods at all because you need to control them. But we don't worry about yield. We don't worry about fabrication. We need the control. And to me, that's more of an engineering task. It's not just physics anymore. And so I think you find this dichotomy. If you want to scale, I think we need more physics on the solid state side, and I think we need more engineering. I'm maybe grossly simplifying things, but these are totally different, outlooks and totally different portfolios of scaling in the different platforms. And we're not yet at that silicon moment where it's very clear that everybody's going to latch onto one. We're all waiting for that.
So, Will, you're representing the fabricated qubits. So
Yeah, sure. No, I would agree with this. Material science is key to what we're doing. We have to improve the coherence times of the qubits, and a lot of this is about surface science. We need to be able to image those surfaces. We then need to interpret what it is that we see, feed that back. It's important to remember that material science is not by itself, that you can make a perfect material, and then as soon as we go into nano and fabricate it, we've altered the surface, we've damaged it or changed it at least. And so fabrication engineering, material science, these are both key. The control, we're still working on that too. It's not like we've got it solved. We definitely leverage, the microwave revolution that happened in the 80s and 90s with gallium arsenide, et cetera. But we still have, some dephasing that happens, and we need to address that with the systems. We need to scale it down, the size of the control, so that we can scale up the size of the quantum computer. And then at the systems engineering level, I would say the topic du jour is modularity. That it's unlikely that we're going to build a quantum computer that has millions and millions of qubits on one wafer or chip, even if we could fit them all, which we probably can, at least for the superconducting. Much better way to go would be to build something that's maybe 1,000 qubit scale and learn how to connect those together. And therein is a tremendous amount of engineering that has to happen.
Yeah. Actually, a colleague, Bray Shuri, was reminding me that a dilution fridge can usually have the cooling power of like 1 milliwatt or a couple of milliwatts. That's not a lot of power to put in some serious computing.
We should remember, though, that a lot of the dill fridges, I would agree with him, don't disagree with Ray, but but that the dill fridges we have today were built for a specific purpose, which was for people like Ray and myself and others to do experiments at a university. When we want to do this at scale, we will build bigger dilution refrigerators or network together dilution refrigerators.
Let's talk about scale up. So in the neutral atoms, how does that look? I can, if you look at what was really important in maybe, well, arguably really important in something like CMOS, it was the kind of information density we could put on a surface, right, to design in the manufacturing. So right now, you guys are using things like, liquid crystals, essentially liquid crystal displays, like spatial light modulators and so on. Like, how does that scale?
Poorly. Right now, we need, which touches on your earlier question. We need a bigger community of participants in this, in the technology development and in the science. I'll give you one concrete example. On the CMOS side, so it's really fantastic to work with people like in the ECS department and other departments on leveraging the advances from CMOS to the application spaces here, like in the quantum control. But you can't directly translate them. Like a good example is when you make a controller, you have to make trade-offs in the number of addressable symbols and the rate at which you can deliver them. And you learn or relearn a lot of the sort of fundamental bottlenecks in control theory and so on. So that involves a control theorist and people together with people who build the machines. And I actually want to punt one question to Sergio here, because one thing in particular, so we're building together with QEra and others, actually a test bed in Orly, and thanks to the director for granting us some space there in Building 38. And that's also with Vladan Vulitic and other members of the Center for Ultra Cold Atoms. And that's a test bed that should be available to the community to see, could this transistor device or this other semiconductor, could that help in the control of these quantum machines that you're building? And it's super important, I think, to people to actually see how the machine actually works. And one of the things there is a major advance from the QEra team and the universities is for logical qubits is to move atoms around and control them more in new control techniques, right? And this is a routing problem. And so I thought it was fascinating that one of the areas of expertise that grew from the semiconductor technology space of routing wires between semiconductor submodules is now being applied, right, by people who used to make FPGAs and so on, to routing atoms around. And so it's completely unexpected. And maybe Sergio, you guys are you're building on this.
I mean, I can say that we've been collaborating with computer scientists to start thinking now into how do we compile the control stack for a neutral atom machine. To me, the question of SLMs is, of course, you can always stage a bunch of SLMs, and it's relatively low risk. To me, it feels like, back in the day when people had wagons and horses, you wanted to go faster, then you put more horses. It feels like that kind of problem. But we don't use that anymore, right? We have our engines. So to me, it feels like at least there's other venues, understanding that at the end, the SLM is just diffracting light, right? And kind of understanding that. For us, we would like to figure out how to get that working. This is where, PICs, photonic integrated devices, that type of manufacturing, I think, can be used to start circumventing the limitations that the SLM gives you, so that we don't end up with a 50-horse wagon. We want to be a little bit smart. So, because at the end of the day, what you want is to scale the atom, not scale the horses. That's basically that. And I think for me, the PIC work is something that really we haven't underutilized in the machine. So pushing that efforts, Dirk, as part of QEra, has been leading some of that. But at the same time, how do you, then as you start scaling up the movement of these atoms, you almost need like a traffic controller, right? You need something that tells you how to kind of move these atoms around. So I think there's, of course, some low-risk ways that you can circumvent the challenges for scaling, but I think we need to be smart, right? We need to be critical about how we implement this.
Can I make like one quick funny observation? When we started QEra, we were looking at the number of channels we needed of control, and they're largely run by acousto-optic modulators, and you would have to like the global production of AOMs in that wavelength range is like 10,000 per year. So you'd have to take the entire production of the world for one of the machines that we were planning to build. So good example. That is not does not scale. So you need to invent something different, right?
Okay. We've got a few minutes left, and I'm going to blame Chris for this because you brought up the H word. So let's talk about hype.
Heuristic. I said heuristic.
No. So it's an interesting situation, right? As you pointed out, right now we're searching for applications for the machines. I think most of us, or I can't really speak for myself, but many people have jumped into this field because of the dream of quantum computers. There's something sort of magical about it. And then we felt, okay, we'll make them, and then cool things will happen. But to sell products, we need to figure out what those are. And right now, we're in the situation where there's actually, as you point out, 10 times more like private capital than government sponsorship, when government is like the obvious, right now, customer. So how long does this last, what do you think?
Well, certainly not forever. I'm not going to say anything profound here, but we've seen the arithmetic of exponentials. The common throwaway line is that with 300 qubits, there are more configurations than there are atoms in the universe. Now, that doesn't mean we get access to all that information, but if you want to process that amount of information at the same time, I just said process. I didn't say you can get it. You're out of luck if you're going to use classical computers. So that single line, I would claim that's not hype. That's the fact. There are problems that will either be solved with quantum computers or they won't be solved at all. Many problems in society. What is regular computing doing now? It's doing really hard problems that are actually not efficient. Approximations to computational chemistry, doing combinatorial searches that are obviously really hard problems. And these problems we can follow Moore's law and whatever new classical generations come out, and we'll get some gains. But there are problems that we'll never touch if they're not quantum. So that sounds like hype, but it's still I guess it will always be an opportunity there. Now the 10-to-1, I think a lot of that is riding AI. I was looking at the Wall Street Journal this morning. On the tech paper, 19 out of the 20 articles were AI. I'm kind of tired of it, but that's one example, and it's been talked about here today. That's one of the examples where we can easily imagine having 1 trillion correlations on a single search with ChatGPT, for instance, but not 1 trillion. So I think there's going to be crunch time in the next several years, 5 to 10 years, when people are going to say, well, where are the quantum computers? So that brings me back to what many of us say at universities, that the science will always be there. And the other H word is, it really is sort of a damaging word, heuristic. We have to embrace heuristics and build these machines, see what they're good for. It's almost certainly going to be a use case that nobody knows right now.
Okay. I'm buying that. Does anyone want to add?
Yeah, sure. There's hype because there's promise, right? And like we just heard, I think that promise is what drives the hype. But of course, what's really going to drive the field forward is, and heard Peter Fisher say this, is getting people's fingers on keyboards. And one of the exciting things for QMIT, I believe, is being able to get quantum computers here on site that people can actually use and develop the algorithms that are going to commercialize this technology. I believe that the world is quantum mechanical. I won't be around, but in 50 to 100 years, I think people are going to look back and they're going to say, of course we're using quantum mechanics to do computation. And of course we're doing that for sensing. because the world is quantum mechanical and it has all these degrees of freedom. But we have to get from here to that point.
All right. Well, I couldn't have wrapped things up better. So I'd like to thank everyone on the panel, and thank you.
Thank you.